Joining me now is Benjamin Anthony. He is the co-founder and CEO of the MirYam Institute. And it's so important that we recognize, one, the lives that have been lost and pay tribute to them, but also recognize that Hamas still has more than 200 hostages. They are mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, kids, grandmothers, and people who are innocent caught in the midst of all of this. Their stories are important to tell and very hard to hear, Benjamin.
Yes, and thank you so very much for saying that and for emphasizing that. You're correct. And I would add to that list our newborns as well. There were pregnant women who were taken as hostages on that morning of October the 7th. Just this week, one of those individuals was reported to have given birth. So you can imagine just the horror of that situation in contrast to what ought to be a day of joy and a day of celebration. Here you have an Israeli woman giving birth to her child in captivity inside the Gaza Strip as a hostage. Where is her husband? Was he able to see this event take place? Nobody knows, but the reality of the matter is that the level of depravity that Hamas demonstrated and showed is the reason that the Israel Defense Forces is continuing to act so thoroughly, with such determination, and dare I say it, with so many victories already in hand, but still pursuing the ultimate victory, which is the destruction and toppling of Hamas, coupled with the return of the remainder of our hostages.
And many of these families now marching to Jerusalem. I want to talk for a moment about Yehudit Wheat, 65 years old, the woman we just shared. Any more that you are learning about how, where, and when she died?
So the Israel Defense Forces hasn't released the specifics of her particular situation and what brought about her demise. Of course, we know that her husband was murdered. We know that she was a kindergarten teacher. We know, as you mentioned, that she's being treated for breast cancer. She was being treated for breast cancer, rather. And again, it's a tragedy under any circumstances when somebody is lost. It's of a particularly tragic nature when one considers the circumstances surrounding this. An elderly woman kidnapped, not treated in the way that she ought to have been treated from a medical perspective, and then ultimately reaching her end under the most horrific circumstances imposed by the terror organization Hamas.
IDF continues to uncover some of these tunnels that they say Hamas is using to hide and also assemble their military arsenal. Any more details you can share about what they're finding specifically?
Sure. So in Shifa Hospital, for example, they have now released footage of a tunnel from that compound, from the compound of Shifa Hospital, that included caches of Kalashnikovs, grenades, Hamas insignias written upon some of the equipment that they recovered from that area. And I just want to establish the contrast here. If one thinks about the largest Israeli hospital, which is Shifa Hospital or Tel HaShomer Hospital, or if one thinks about Walter Reed Hospital in the United States of America, one would not enter that hospital, dig around, excavate, and find Kalashnikovs and grenades and the insignatures of terror organizations. It's only inside the Gaza Strip that we find this. I believe that we will continue to find that, and I'm sure that the search for further representation and presence of Hamas inside the hospital will be revealed in due course. But keep in mind, it's a massive facility, and a thorough search therein will take time.
Communication blackouts continue in Gaza as well. How is that impacting the situation on the ground in the growing humanitarian crisis?
Well, the growing humanitarian crisis is something that the States of Israel is working to alleviate somewhat as the result of a request by the U.S. administration. And there's a lot of controversy swirling around that. For example, Israel has announced that it's going to allow 2 trucks filled with fuel into the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. Now, these 2 trucks, to be clear, in no way, shape or form are supplying the level of fuel that is typically required. But being good to our word, we in Israel have asked for the Gazan civilians to move to the south of the enclave so that they can be spared the fighting that's taking place in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. As a result of that, the government has made the decision that we ought to and must maintain the survival of those citizens and do all that we can in order to avert any sort of humanitarian crisis. There is not a humanitarian crisis taking place inside the southern Gaza Strip at this time, and the State of Israel is making its due and just contribution to subverting that, but highly, highly controversial. I can tell you that many civilians in the states of Israel, many families of the hostages inside the Gaza Strip right now are outraged about the injection of fuel into the Gaza Strip. But these are the extremely complex decisions that our government has to make at this time.
Safe in the south, but for how long? Because we're hearing reports that the IDF may now shift its focus to the south. Is there any truth to that?
I believe there is truth to that. I think that that's accurate, but I don't think that that will impact upon the safety of the civilians. The Israel Defense Forces continues to pursue its dual-headed goal. Number one, the return of the hostages, and as I mentioned, the toppling and destruction of Hamas. Now, Hamas is stationed there down in the south of the enclave, it's believed. If that's where we have to take the fighting to, we will do so. But look at the incredible humanitarian efforts made by the Israel Defense Forces, bringing incubators, doctors, Arab speakers into Shifa Hospital prior to operating in that area. It's a tremendous testament to the humanity, accuracy, and precision of our forces. And I have to tell you, I'm very, very proud of the way in which we are operating, including inside that hospital, because firstly, it's in adherence to our moral code, not the legal code, but our moral code. Remember, the moral threshold for warfare is far higher than is the legal threshold. And secondly, because I think it sends a very clear message, and that message is wherever Hamas is, wherever they ensconce themselves, wherever they feel that they might find shelter and succor, they will not do so. Not now, not after the dreadful, horrific, heinous attack of October 7th upon our citizens, our civilians, and our soldiers.
Yeah, moral clarity, something we have heard since the start of this, but it depends on from which lens you look through, how you see that. Benjamin Anthony, thank you as always.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with much more here on News Nation Live.